Before satellites mapped the ocean floor and archaeologists learned to dive beneath shifting tides, humanity imagined worlds lost beneath the sea. Among the most enduring of these stories is Atlantis, a powerful civilization said to have vanished in a single catastrophic moment, swallowed by the ocean and preserved only in memory and myth. For centuries, scholars, explorers, and storytellers have searched for Atlantis across the Mediterranean and beyond, often projecting the legend onto familiar centers of ancient power. Yet rarely has attention turned toward the vast coastlines of Africa, a continent whose relationship with the sea stretches back thousands of years and whose oral traditions speak quietly, yet persistently, of cities claimed by water. Africa's shores face some of the oldest maritime routes on Earth. From the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean and along the Atlantic coast, generations of sailors, traders, and fishermen lived in intimate dialogue with the ocean. In many coastal communities, stories passed down through elders describe settlements that once stood where waves now roll endlessly. Fishermen along parts of East Africa speak of stone structures glimpsed beneath clear waters at low tide. West African legends recount prosperous towns punished by the sea after moral imbalance or spiritual neglect. In North Africa, ancient accounts describe harbors that gradually disappeared as shoreline shifted. These narratives are not framed as fantasy. Rather, they exist as cultural memory, warnings, teachings, and explanations for landscapes transformed over time. For much of modern history, such stories were dismissed as folklore, symbolic tales meant only to convey moral lessons. However, recent scientific understanding challenges that assumption. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose dramatically as melting glaciers released vast amounts of water into the oceans. Coastlines around the world moved inland, sometimes by kilometers, drowning plains, villages, and early settlements. What today appears as timeless ocean was once habitable land. Entire human communities would have witnessed the gradual or sudden loss of their homes. Experiences powerful enough to echo through generations as legend. Africa, with its extensive and diverse coastlines, was particularly vulnerable to these changes. Ancient populations living near fertile coastal zones depended on fishing, trade, and seasonal migration. As waters advanced, ports and settlements may have been abandoned, rebuilt farther inland, or lost entirely. Unlike stone monuments in deserts, coastal structures are easily erased by erosion, sediment, and coral growth, leaving little visible evidence above water. Yet absence on land does not necessarily mean absence in history. Increasingly, researchers are beginning to ask whether fragments of these lost landscapes still rest beneath the waves, waiting to be rediscovered through underwater archaeology. The fascination with Atlantis itself reveals something deeper about human curiosity. The legend is less about a single place and more about a recurring human experience. The rise and fall of civilizations, the fragility of progress, and the overwhelming power of nature. When viewed through this lens, Africa's submerged stories become part of a global pattern rather than an isolated myth. Instead of searching for a mythical empire of impossible technology, we may instead uncover networks of thriving port cities whose achievements were practical, cultural, and deeply connected to their environment. These societies may not have built fantastical machines, but they mastered navigation, trade, and coexistence with powerful natural forces. Oral tradition plays a crucial role in preserving such histories. Across many African cultures, knowledge is transmitted not through written chronicles, but through storytelling, ritual, and collective memory. Stories adapt over time, blending historical events with spiritual meaning, ensuring that lessons remain relevant for each generation. A village lost to rising waters might become a tale of divine judgment or ancestral warning, transforming environmental catastrophe into moral guidance. In this way, Myth becomes a vessel carrying historical truth, even as details shift and symbolism grows. Today, advances in marine archaeology and ocean mapping are allowing scientists to revisit places once inaccessible. Sonar imaging, underwater surveys, and collaborative research with local communities are revealing traces of ancient human activity beneath coastal waters worldwide. These discoveries invite a reconsideration of long-held assumptions about where complex societies developed and how interconnected ancient peoples truly were. Africa, long portrayed as peripheral in narratives of maritime history, is increasingly recognized as a dynamic participant in early global exchange. The idea of echoes of Atlantis is therefore not a search for fantasy, but an exploration of forgotten perspectives. Beneath Africa's waves may lie stories of adaptation, resilience, and knowledge shaped by generations who understood the rhythms of the ocean. Their disappearance was not necessarily sudden or mysterious, but part of Earth's natural cycles, cycles that humanity is once again confronting in an age of rising seas and environmental uncertainty. As we begin this journey, the question shifts from whether Atlantis existed to something far more meaningful. What happens to human wisdom when landscapes vanish? If ancient African port cities were indeed lost beneath the ocean, their greatest legacy may not be ruins of stone, but lessons encoded in memory, reminders of how civilizations respond to change, how cultures preserve identity in the face of loss, and how the sea, though capable of erasing physical traces, can never fully silence the echoes of human history. Long before European maps charted the oceans or classical historians recorded maritime empires, Africa stood at the center of vast networks of trade that connected continents, cultures, and ideas. The seas surrounding Africa were not barriers but living highways, linking diverse societies through movement, exchange, and shared knowledge. Along the shores of the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic coast, ancient African port cities emerged as gateways between inland civilizations and distant worlds. These coastal hubs were places where merchants negotiated across languages, sailors read the stars and winds, and communities developed sophisticated systems that allowed them to thrive in dynamic maritime environments. One of the most remarkable aspects of ancient African maritime history is how early these networks formed. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that African traders were active participants in long-distance commerce thousands of years ago. The Red Sea served as a crucial corridor between northeastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, while the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean enabled predictable seasonal voyages linking East Africa with Arabia, Persia, and India. Sailors learned to harness these winds with remarkable precision, departing at specific times of the year and returning months later when the currents reversed. This deep understanding of natural cycles reflects not only technological skill, but an intimate relationship with the environment, knowledge, accumulated through generations of observation and experience. Ports such as Adulis, located near present-day Eritrea, flourished as cosmopolitan centers where ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animals moved toward Mediterranean markets. Historical records describe Adulis as a bustling harbor frequented by merchants from across the ancient world, demonstrating Africa's integration into global trade long before the rise of later empires. Farther south along the Swahili coast, cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar developed into thriving urban centers built from coral stone and shaped by both African traditions and international influences. These cities were not colonies imposed from abroad, but uniquely African societies that absorbed foreign ideas while maintaining strong local identities. The Swahili civilization, in particular, illustrates the sophistication of African maritime culture. Its people constructed ocean-going vessels known as dhows, expertly navigating open waters using stars, currents, and inherited navigational lore. Trade brought textiles, ceramics, and spices from Asia, while African exports included gold from the interior, iron tools, timber, and agricultural products. Markets became spaces of cultural blending, where languages mixed and artistic styles evolved. The Swahili language itself emerged as a testament to this exchange, combining Bantu linguistic roots with Arabic influences, reflecting centuries of interaction shaped by the sea. On the northern coast, Carthage rose as one of the most powerful maritime cities of the ancient world. Founded by Phoenician settlers, but deeply rooted in African soil, Carthage developed advanced shipbuilding techniques and controlled extensive trade routes across the Mediterranean. Its harbors were engineering marvels, carefully designed to accommodate large fleets and commercial activity. While often remembered through the lens of its conflict with Rome, Carthage also symbolizes Africa's long-standing participation in naval innovation and economic organization. Its influence demonstrates that African maritime history was neither isolated nor secondary, but central to ancient global dynamics. Even along the Atlantic coast, where written records are scarcer, oral traditions and archaeological findings suggest vibrant coastal exchanges. Fishing communities developed durable canoe technologies capable of traveling considerable distances, facilitating regional trade long before external contact intensified. Rivers flowing into the Atlantic served as arteries connecting inland kingdoms to coastal markets, allowing goods and cultural practices to move between ecological zones. These networks reveal a continent deeply interconnected through waterways, where maritime knowledge complemented overland trade routes, such as those crossing the Sahara. What made these port cities extraordinary was not only their economic success, but their role as meeting points of worldview and imagination. Merchants carried more than goods. They transported beliefs, stories, artistic motifs, and scientific ideas. Astronomical knowledge used for navigation merged with spiritual interpretations of the sky. Religious practices adapted as travelers encountered new cosmologies, leading to hybrid traditions shaped by encounter rather than conquest. Ports became spaces where identities were negotiated and redefined, demonstrating an early form of globalization rooted in cooperation and exchange. These thriving coastal societies depended on a delicate balance between land and sea. Harbors required careful maintenance, knowledge of tides, and adaptation to shifting shorelines. Communities understood the risks posed by storms, erosion, and changing waters, embedding respect for the ocean into cultural practices and rituals. The sea was both provider and threat, a source of wealth that demanded humility. Such awareness influenced architecture, settlement patterns, and seasonal rhythms of life, suggesting that survival depended as much on wisdom as on commerce. Seen together, these maritime networks challenge outdated narratives that portray ancient Africa as disconnected from global history. Instead, Africa appears as a dynamic center of innovation and exchange, where port cities functioned as intellectual and economic bridges between continents. The prosperity of these coastal hubs also hints at what may have been lost when environmental changes altered shorelines and submerged settlements. If some ports disappeared beneath rising waters or gradual coastal transformation, they would have taken with them libraries of lived knowledge, navigation techniques, ecological understanding, and cultural traditions shaped by centuries of interaction with the ocean. Understanding these ancient maritime networks is essential to grasping the deeper mystery explored in this journey. The legends of submerged cities do not emerge from empty imagination. They arise from regions where vibrant coastal societies once flourished. Before we search the ocean floor for ruins, we must first recognize the scale and sophistication of the civilizations that stood along Africa's shores. Only then can we begin to imagine how their echoes might still linger beneath the waves, preserved not only in stone and sediment, but in the enduring memory of trade routes that once connected the world through African seas. For centuries, The idea of cities lost beneath the sea belonged more to legend than to science, a realm of imagination shaped by myth and speculation. Yet in recent decades, advances in underwater archaeology have begun transforming these stories into fields of serious investigation. Along Africa's vast coastlines, researchers, divers, and local communities are uncovering physical traces that suggest parts of the continent's ancient coastal world now rest beneath shifting layers of sand and water. These discoveries do not reveal a single grand Atlantis, but something perhaps more compelling, fragments of real human settlements gradually claimed by natural forces over thousands of years. The ocean is both a destroyer and a preserver. While waves erode structures exposed to currents, submerged environments can also protect artifacts from human interference, sealing them beneath sediment like time capsules. Using sonar mapping, satellite imaging, and underwater excavation techniques, archaeologists have identified submerged harbor walls, stone anchors, pottery fragments, and remnants of man-made formations along several regions of Africa's coastline. Each discovery adds a small but significant piece to a larger puzzle, suggesting that ancient shorelines once extended far beyond their present boundaries. Along the Mediterranean coast of North Africa, evidence of submerged structures has long been known. Near Alexandria in Egypt, underwater excavations have revealed entire districts of the ancient city now resting beneath the sea, including collapsed temples, statues, and harbor installations. Earthquakes and rising sea levels contributed to the gradual sinking of these areas, demonstrating how even major urban centers could disappear from view over time. Similar findings near ancient ports across the Mediterranean basin reinforce the idea that coastal change was not rare, but a recurring historical process affecting many civilizations connected to the sea. Farther south, along the Red Sea and East African coast, researchers have begun investigating sites linked to early trade networks described in ancient texts. The port of Adulis, once a thriving commercial hub, now lies partly buried beneath sediment near modern shorelines, with ongoing research suggesting that portions of its harbor may be submerged offshore. Divers exploring coastal waters in Tanzania and Kenya have reported stone features and anchor remains consistent with ancient maritime activity. While some findings remain debated, they encourage further exploration into how changing sea levels reshaped the geography of early Swahili settlements. The Indian Ocean presents unique challenges for archaeology. Strong currents, coral growth, and sediment movement can conceal structures quickly, making systematic study difficult. Yet local fishermen sometimes become unexpected collaborators in discovery, reporting unusual formations or artifacts caught in nets. In several cases, oral traditions guiding researchers toward particular locations have proven surprisingly accurate, highlighting the value of combining scientific methods with indigenous knowledge. Stories passed down through generations occasionally point to places where communities once stood before the sea advanced inland, suggesting that cultural memory may preserve geographic truths long after physical evidence becomes hidden. On Africa's western coastline, underwater archaeology is still in its early stages. But growing interest has led to exploratory surveys near river deltas and ancient trading regions. These areas were especially vulnerable to environmental transformation, as sediment shifts and powerful Atlantic storms continually reshape the coastline. Rivers that once emptied into bustling ports may have altered course, leaving former settlements submerged or buried beneath layers of mud. Though evidence remains fragmentary, researchers increasingly suspect that early coastal communities existed in locations now underwater. Their remains awaiting systematic investigation. Scientific understanding of post-Ice Age sea level rise provides a crucial framework for interpreting these discoveries. Around 12,000 years ago, global oceans rose by more than 100 meters as glaciers melted, flooding coastal plains worldwide. This process did not occur evenly, In some regions, sudden pulses of rising water dramatically altered landscapes within generations. For communities living near fertile coastal zones, such changes would have meant relocation, adaptation, or abandonment. Over centuries, buildings collapsed, shorelines retreated, and human presence faded beneath advancing tides. What survives today are scattered remnants, anchors without ships, foundations without walls, silent witnesses to landscapes transformed beyond recognition. The relationship between myth and archaeology becomes particularly intriguing in this context. Legends describing cities swallowed by the sea often contain symbolic elements, yet they may originate from collective memories of environmental catastrophe. When elders recount stories of ancestral towns lost to water, they may be preserving echoes of real events experienced by distant ancestors. Archaeology does not confirm myth in a literal sense, but it reveals how myth and history can intersect, each illuminating aspects of human experience the other cannot fully capture alone. Despite technological progress, underwater exploration along African coasts remains limited compared to other parts of the world. Funding challenges, logistical difficulties, and the sheer scale of the coastline mean that vast areas remain unexplored. This absence of evidence should not be mistaken for absence of history. In many ways, Africa's submerged heritage represents one of the least studied chapters of global archaeology, offering enormous potential for future discovery. Each new expedition carries the possibility of reshaping historical narratives, revealing how deeply maritime life shaped African civilizations. What emerges from these investigations is not the image of a mythical super-civilization suddenly erased, but a more human and profound story. Communities adapting to a changing planet. Ports rose where geography allowed trade to flourish and disappeared when nature altered the balance between land and sea. Their loss reminds us that civilizations are not fixed monuments, but living systems vulnerable to environmental change. Beneath Africa's waters lie not only ruins, but evidence of resilience, migration, and transformation. As divers descend into dim underwater landscapes, visibility fading into blue silence, they encounter more than artifacts. They encounter moments frozen in time. A carved stone block resting among coral, an anchor embedded in sand, or fragments of pottery scattered across the seabed all suggest lives once lived at the edge of the ocean. These remnants challenge modern assumptions about permanence and progress, reminding us that history often survives in unexpected places. The search for submerged African port cities is therefore not merely an archaeological quest, but an effort to reconnect fragments of humanity's shared past, recovering voices long muted by the slow and patient rise of the sea. If the ruins of ancient port cities reveal how people lived and traded, the deeper legacy of these coastal societies lies in how they understood the world itself. For many ancient African communities, the ocean was not simply a resource or a route for commerce. It was a living presence woven into spiritual belief, social order, and ethical responsibility. The wisdom of these port cities emerged from generations who learned that survival depended not on conquering nature, but on listening to it. Their knowledge systems blended observation, spirituality, and communal memory, creating ways of life shaped by balance between humanity and the vast forces of the sea. Across Africa's coastal cultures, water carried profound symbolic meaning. The ocean was often viewed as a boundary between worlds, a place where ancestors could travel, where spirits resided, and where transformation occurred. Among various East African traditions, the sea was associated with both protection and mystery, demanding rituals of respect before voyages or fishing expeditions. Offerings were sometimes made to ensure safe passage, reflecting the belief that human activity required harmony with unseen forces. Rather than separating practical knowledge from spiritual understanding, these societies treated them as inseparable aspects of reality. Navigation relied on reading winds and stars, but also on inherited wisdom passed through songs, proverbs, and ritual instruction. Port cities became unique centers where spiritual and intellectual exchange flourished alongside economic activity. Merchants arriving from distant lands brought new beliefs and philosophies, which blended with local traditions to create dynamic cultural landscapes. Mosques, shrines, and sacred gathering places stood near markets and docks, illustrating how commerce and spirituality coexisted. Elders and spiritual leaders often guided communal decisions, interpreting natural events, storms, shifting tides, or unusual animal behavior, as messages requiring collective reflection. In this worldview, environmental change was not random chaos, but part of a meaningful relationship between humans and the natural world. This perspective fostered forms of environmental awareness that modern societies are only beginning to rediscover. Coastal communities developed fishing practices aligned with seasonal cycles, avoiding overexploitation by observing breeding periods and migration patterns. Knowledge of currents, coral ecosystems, and weather signs allowed sailors to travel efficiently while minimizing risk. Architecture adapted to climate conditions, with settlements positioned according to wind patterns and tidal behavior. Such practices were not framed as environmentalism in the modern sense, yet they demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of sustainability grounded in lived experience. Equally important was the social wisdom cultivated within these maritime hubs. Port cities required cooperation among diverse groups: traders, craftsmen, sailors, farmers, and spiritual authorities, each dependent on the others for stability. Systems of hospitality and negotiation emerged to manage cultural diversity, enabling peaceful exchange across linguistic and ethnic boundaries. Trust became an essential currency, reinforced through shared rituals and communal accountability. These social frameworks allowed cities to thrive despite constant movement and external influence, suggesting that openness and adaptability were central strengths rather than vulnerabilities. Ancestral reverence also played a vital role in shaping coastal life. Many communities believe that ancestors remained present, guiding descendants through dreams, signs, or ritual communication. The ocean itself was sometimes imagined as a pathway connecting the living and the departed, reinforcing respect for history and continuity. Decisions affecting the community were understood not only in terms of immediate benefit, but also in relation to past generations and future descendants. This long-view perspective encouraged responsibility toward both environment and society, embedding ethics within everyday practice. When viewed through this lens, the wisdom of submerged port cities extends far beyond technological achievement. Their legacy lies in systems of knowledge that integrated science, spirituality, and community into a unified worldview. These societies understood uncertainty as a natural condition of life near the sea. Storms could destroy fleets, tides could reshape harbors, and fortunes could change with shifting trade routes. Yet rather than seeking absolute control, they cultivated resilience, flexibility in settlement patterns, diversity in trade connections, and cultural practices that reinforce collective identity during periods of change. The disappearance of some coastal cities beneath rising waters, therefore, represents more than a physical loss. It marks the fading of knowledge traditions developed over centuries. When settlements vanished, so too did localized expertise, ways of reading subtle environmental signals, stories encoding historical memory, and rituals that reinforced ethical relationships with nature. Although fragments survive in oral traditions and cultural practices, much remains hidden, scattered like artifacts across the ocean floor. Modern researchers increasingly recognize that understanding ancient societies requires listening not only to archaeological evidence, but also to living cultural heritage. Communities along Africa's coast still preserve songs about the sea, ceremonies honoring water spirits, and navigation knowledge rooted in ancestral teaching. These traditions offer clues to how earlier port cities may have functioned, revealing continuity between past and present. They suggest that wisdom is rarely lost entirely. It transforms, adapting to new circumstances even as landscapes change. In a world shaped by rapid technological advancement, the worldview of ancient African port societies offers a powerful contrast. Their achievements remind us that progress does not depend solely on innovation or expansion, but also on relationship, with environment, with community, and with memory. The ocean that sustained their prosperity also demanded humility, teaching lessons about limits and interconnectedness. By examining the spiritual and ecological wisdom embedded in these coastal cultures, we begin to understand that the true treasure of submerged cities may not lie in recovered artifacts, but in rediscovered ways of thinking about humanity's place within the natural world. As the search for lost ports continues beneath Africa's waters, their enduring message emerges gradually. Civilizations flourish when they learn to move with the rhythms of the earth rather than against them. The wisdom carried by these ancient shores echoes across time, inviting modern societies to reconsider how knowledge, belief, and environment can exist not in conflict, but in harmony. As the echoes of submerged African port cities rise from myth, archaeology, and cultural memory, they begin to speak not only about the past, but about the future humanity now faces. The stories of coastlines transformed and settlements lost are no longer distant historical curiosities. They mirror challenges unfolding in the modern world. Today, rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and intensifying storms threaten communities across the globe, including many regions along Africa's shores. In this sense, the fate of ancient port cities becomes deeply relevant, offering both warning and guidance drawn from earlier encounters between human civilization and environmental change. Modern science confirms that the oceans are once again advancing. Climate change accelerates processes that ancient societies experienced on slower timescales: melting ice, warming waters, and shifting ecosystems. Cities that once seemed permanent now confront the same vulnerability faced by their predecessors. The difference lies in awareness. Humanity possesses technological knowledge capable of measuring change with precision, yet often struggles to translate that knowledge into collective action. The submerged ports of the past remind us that environmental transformation is not hypothetical. It has reshaped civilizations before and will continue to do so if balance is ignored. Rediscovering Africa's underwater heritage also challenges long-standing narratives about world history. For centuries, global historical storytelling frequently minimized Africa's contributions to maritime innovation and international exchange, portraying the continent as isolated rather than interconnected. The growing recognition of ancient African port networks and possible submerged settlements reshapes this perspective, revealing a history rich with exploration, adaptation, and intellectual exchange. Recovering these stories is therefore not only an academic pursuit, but an act of cultural restoration, restoring visibility to civilizations whose achievements were overlooked or forgotten. Preserving underwater heritage has become an urgent task. Unlike monuments on land, submerged archaeological sites are vulnerable to looting, industrial activity, and environmental degradation. Without careful protection, invaluable evidence of early human history may disappear before it is fully understood. International collaboration between scientists, governments, and local communities is increasingly essential, combining advanced technology with traditional knowledge to safeguard these fragile archives beneath the sea. Each recovered artifact or mapped structure contributes to a broader understanding of humanity's shared past, reminding us that history belongs not to a single culture, but to the collective human story. Equally important is the preservation of intangible heritage, the oral traditions, rituals, and ecological knowledge still alive among coastal communities. These living traditions may hold insights as valuable as any archaeological discovery. Stories of ancestral warnings, respect for ocean spirits, and seasonal environmental awareness reflect generations of observation encoded into culture. In an era seeking sustainable ways of living, such knowledge offers alternative perspectives that emphasize coexistence rather than domination. Listening to these voices allows modern societies to reconnect technological progress with ethical responsibility. The rediscovery of submerged African cities also carries a psychological and philosophical dimension. Humanity has long imagined Atlantis as a symbol of lost perfection, a cautionary tale about arrogance and decline. Yet the real lesson emerging from Africa's coastal history is more nuanced. Civilizations do not simply vanish because of moral failure or sudden catastrophe. They transform, migrate, and leave traces that influence future generations. Loss becomes part of continuity rather than an absolute ending. The ocean, often seen as an eraser of history, instead acts as a vast archive preserving fragments until humanity develops the means and the curiosity to rediscover them. These echoes encourage a rethinking of progress itself. Ancient port societies thrived not solely through expansion or accumulation, but through adaptability, cooperation, and respect for natural rhythms. Their disappearance underscores the limits of permanence, reminding us that even the most successful societies remain dependent on environmental stability. As modern cities expand along vulnerable coastlines, the experiences of these earlier communities invite reflection. How can development proceed without repeating cycles of loss? What forms of knowledge must be preserved to ensure resilience in uncertain times? Ultimately, the story of submerged African port cities is not one of disappearance, but of rediscovery, a gradual awakening to histories hidden in plain sight. Beneath layers of water and sediment lie reminders that human achievement has always been diverse, interconnected, and deeply shaped by environment. By uncovering these histories, humanity expands its understanding of civilization itself, recognizing that wisdom often survives not in monuments of stone, but in relationships between people, memory, and landscape. As this journey concludes, the image of Atlantis transforms. It is no longer a single mythical island awaiting dramatic discovery, but a metaphor for countless human experiences scattered across the world's oceans. Along Africa's coasts, the sea holds echoes of traders, sailors, storytellers, and communities who once stood at the meeting point of continents and currents. Their voices reach us through fragments of archaeology, living tradition, and the enduring rhythm of waves against shorelines that continue to change. The ocean does not silence history. It reshapes how history is heard. And as we listen more carefully through science, storytelling, and renewed respect for forgotten knowledge, the echoes of these ancient African ports offer something profoundly contemporary. A reminder that humanity's future depends on remembering how past civilizations learned to live with a world in constant motion.